Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Mike Kuperberg. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, or USGCRP. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce a new resource to you today. Before we dive into information about the site's development and a tutorial, I'd like to give you a quick background on our program and the interagency context this resource was developed in. The U.S. Global Change Research Program was mandated by Congress in the Global Change Research Act of 1990 to assist the nation and the world to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. Today, our program has 15 member agencies that work together to advance global change science and to provide useful and usable information to decision makers as they respond to environmental change. As part of that mandate, our member agencies work to create and streamline actionable science, information, and tools designed to support training and decision-making. This new Sea Level Change portal is an outstanding example of a whole-of-government effort to make sea level change data more accessible and easier to use. It's built on a long history of interagency collaboration around sea level change, data, and information. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mark Ostler, for background on the collaboration that made this effort possible. Mark is the Senior Advisor for Coastal Inundation and Resilience for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, where he works to advance coastal science and the ability of decision makers to prepare for and respond to changes affecting the nation's coastlines. Mark serves as the NOAA representative within various White House interagency groups, including the National Security Council, Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the Council on Environmental Quality. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike. It is a pleasure to be here and share the good news of this new resource. The pace of environmental change at the coast is intense. We can move forward to the next slide. The coasts are a crucible of human, economic, and ecological activity, and each of these components is bearing the brunt of this environmental change month after month and year after year. The coasts are a proving ground for our nation to demonstrate an ability to understand and adapt to these changes. Having the fundamental science about how Mother Nature is changing, where she's headed, and when and how quickly is a prerequisite for us to succeed in this endeavor. This initiative marks an exciting advance in federal efforts to address sea level change, representing a first-of-its-kind, coordinated interagency approach to producing and disseminating sea level science to the nation. This effort combines the expertise and resources of multiple agencies and will continue to evolve over time as the state of science evolves. Next slide. The motivation here is to build on a long history extending back well over a decade of principal investigators, subject matter experts, and sea level rise researchers working together on this topic. Four graphics are the cover screenshots of prior interagency federal summaries of the state of the science on sea level change. The one on the bottom right is the most recent one, which was released to the nation in February of 2022. One of the things that grew out of that collaboration is both a degree of literacy with how each of the agencies do serve and seek to serve even more effectively in this space. It grew trust between the agencies and the scientists working together made clear that there is an appetite for us to do even more together, more than just publish a state of the science every 4 or 5 years, but to actually create a home for focused collaboration on these topics and create a new resource whereby we could bring the fruit of that labor to the public. So what we're sharing today is the success of both of those efforts. Next slide. Bringing together the agencies to work more collaboratively on sea level science and deliver that information to the public aligns with an array of administrative priorities. You can see the title boxes. You see the letters EO repeated here. Each of those is an executive order issued by the administration from the White House to the executive branch agencies, advising on how the executive branch should be in the business of improving both the foundational science and the provision of environmental information, ensuring it has impacts on improving equity, on the ground, and myriad other facets of relevant progress within this administration on these topics. Sea level rise is but one slice of the Earth system, but this example is a compelling and recent success story that helps promote data-driven adaptation and decision-making on the ground. Next slide. The motivation here continues into the agencies themselves, where we have heard repeatedly that it can be difficult to discern where some of the foundational information on sea level change resides. Is it on this agency's website, or is it on that? And gosh, these numbers look the same. Are they the same, or are they actually different? And so the hope with this effort is to improve clarification and reduce confusion. The part I'm most excited about is that central circle. It is an important evolution for the federal government and all of the contributors on a complex topic like this to find ways to transcend coordination, where you and I are simply helping each other stay abreast of what we're doing because we know it relates and hopefully it connects, and gosh, I'm going to cheer for you as long as you cheer for me, and all of those exciting coordination efforts that have been going on for a long time. It is important in the face of the pace of change and the impact of the change at the coast that our agencies are increasingly in the business of co-production, where from the beginning we are designing together the things that we are seeking to improve upon, be that foundational research, Earth system observations, modeling, sharing supercomputing resources, sharing expertise in the networks we have on the ground, and what we're hearing in terms of effective provision of this information to support decision making. All of that sits at the heart of these advances. Next slide. We expect that there will be benefits accrued. This effort is not just an academic one, but that it will result in enhanced community, policymaker, and business decision making to improve resilience and improve sustainability on the ground. Clarified and cohesive information will support disaster preparedness and emergency planning, ultimately protecting lives and property. It will aid in infrastructure planning, long-term capital improvement budgeting, and reduce long-term costs, both to the organizations, but also ultimately to the nation. And in promoting environmental conservation by identifying at-risk areas, encouraging sustainable conservation, restoration, and preservation practices. And it will finally serve to foster a focus from the academic community and other parts of the research environment within the federal government. This task force can increasingly communicate where the needs are with respect to Earth system observations and foundational research, ultimately to drive the fidelity of our ability to predict and measure where Mother Nature is headed in this sphere. Next slide. As Mike noted, this task force is proud to partner with the U.S. Global Change Research Program. This work integrates scientific efforts from a host of different federal agencies, ensuring that research findings are consistent and that they have access to informed national policy and decision making. Provides the task force with a structured leadership environment that will improve accountability and focus across the agencies in a way that transcends just the scientists working together, but actually pushes that accountability and transparency up into the executive levels and into the policy levels of each of the agencies. Next slide. Those goals are reflected here in the task force governance structure. These are the folks sitting at the helm of this, supported by USGCRP and a range of additional colleagues that are helping get this work done. There is a technical body on the right, the co-chairs, Dr. Hamilton's with us today, and the Executive Steering Committee on the left, which are 7 of us working to interface between the scientific work of the technical body and the executive and policy levels within our agencies and back through Mike with the White House. Building this governance framework was key to ensuring that this resource could be developed sustainably and effectively and build trust between the agencies and the public and the scientific community and those providing services on the ground in our communities. By aligning under a unified strategy, this approach ensures that efforts to contribute will be done in a way that's consistent and of high quality, both on the scientific side, but also on the service delivery side. Next slide. This diagram is of the timeline of the interagency engagement and the collaboration that has resulted in the successful formation of the task force under USGCRP and the successful public release of the website, which you will get a peek at here in just one more moment. It may not surprise you to hear that moving complex initiatives to completion within the federal government is not always straightforward. Getting 7 agencies, the technical experts, policy and executives, and the White House entirely on board with all facets of this approach, the words that we're going to use and how it's all going to come together is not a trivial matter. I am extremely proud of this group for moving all of this from something that seemed only like a good idea into something that exists and is functioning today and serving the public in just less than 2 years. It's an extremely impressive feat. This group should be applauded for that. I'm pleased now to pass this across to Dr. Ben Hamilton. Dr. Hamilton is a research scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He is the lead of the NASA Sea-Level Change Science team, and he and his team led the development of this new website on behalf of the task force. So you cannot have a better tour guide here as Ben gives us a peek at this new resource. Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Tremendous introduction, as always. I am going to take over the screen in just a second, walk you through a tutorial here, but I think before doing so, I want to acknowledge a couple folks here and a couple groups. So as Mark said at the end there, I mean, this was a huge lift within the government to get agencies to work together, to come together and deliver this resource. So Mark referenced the steering committee on the previous slide of this new task force. I think that played a tremendously important role to provide the programmatic motivation to come together and actually deliver on this resource. And I also want to note USGCRP and their support to, one, provide the website at globalchange.gov for this, but also the support to kind of get this over the finish line and develop it. And then the last thing here, as I shift into an overview of the site itself, I want to acknowledge that there was a team, not a huge team, but a team that really led the content development of this that was spread across multiple agencies. Alexa J, who is leading this call as part of USGCRP, and then Britt Parker, and then several others. We met weekly, and there was a lot of email back and forth really to get this content pulled together and have it organized in such a way that that we could deliver this effectively. So I do want to acknowledge the significant work that went in across the agency. So this really was a true interagency effort to develop the content that was here. And the last point before I start sharing and go through, I do want to acknowledge that many of you on the call, I think over the past years or months, have really provided the motivation to do better, to work together, to provide consistency in what we're providing. So I think the push that you all have given and the feedback you provided, again, was a constant drumbeat in the background to make sure that we were following through on this. So again, this was work that was done within a group that developed it, but it was a huge effort on behalf of a lot of different agency members and other folks. All right, so with that, I am going to share my screen and I'm going to walk through the site. Hopefully you all have had a chance to look through it. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and highlight some of the key features that we developed as part of this site. And when you come into the site, come to this first landing page, one of the key things to note there is the 7 agencies that contributed to this and really meaningfully contributed to it. So there are probably interagency examples. I know some on the NASA side where I work, where NASA did most of the work and other agencies kind of signed on. I think in this case, it was a true effort where each agency really put up equities and resources to develop this content. And I think hopefully it was something that each agency could then be proud of signing on to. So the goal here is really to provide that authoritative vision. I'm going to talk a little bit more about where you can get a better description of that in just a second. But the 2 key pieces of content that we developed as part of this is the Sea-Level 101, this kind of new educational resource. I say new, it's largely content and explanations that have existed across the federal government and the sites that we maintain, but it's a fresh look about how we deliver this information, how we articulate it to those that really need this information the most. And then there's this National Sea Level Explorer. So this is not a data portal. It is not somewhere to go and get a bunch of data sets, but we did want to deliver some key information in the form of new visualizations and new statistics that come from that technical report that Mark referred to. So as you look through the site, it really is bringing that technical report, that 2022 report that each agency contributed to, bringing it to life and trying to make it as relevant as possible to those that are living at the coast, and really helping people understand the changes that have occurred in the past and those that might occur in the future. But before I get into that, I kind of want to start from the back here. So one of the key things that Mark covered is that this site is the public face of that interagency task force on sea level. It was the opportunity for us to come together again and deliver information in a shared space. And within that, we went through a pretty substantial effort of trying to get clear statements about what the federal agencies do together related to sea level rise, but also what each agency does individually, right? So within this process, over that 2-year process that Mark talked about, we heard a lot from folks to like, what does NOAA do versus what does NASA do? What does USGS do versus what FEMA does? And there's not necessarily clear statements anywhere of where one agency focuses their mission and where another agency might focus, and then where those things start to intersect. So this site here is really an opportunity to try to explain what each agency is doing, what they bring to the table, and then, like I said, have that shared vision of why we're doing this together. And that's really what this statement is providing here. The other element, we do want to describe this task force, so you can see within this page how the task force is working, what the objectives of the task force are, who is in the task force. So really a lot of that stuff that Mark just covered is described here as well. So if you want further information on the task force, then you can go here for that information. One of the key things is to make sure that people know there are living bodies and a working entity behind this website. So it is something we plan to continue to use as we go forward into the future. It's not going to become stale. It's not something that will get updated once every 2 years or potentially never. It's something that we want as the task force to keep developing and being responsive to the needs that are communicated to us, and to try to represent more of the information that is within the shared federal agency space. So again, this is just clarifying that we do have this working body, this very active working group behind this resource. So then on the resources tab here, this is where you can see the 2022 technical report and some of the key findings. So at launch in 2022, NOAA produced a really nice landing page articulating some of the key findings from the report, providing access to the report. We've taken some of that information and carried it over into delivering it here in this shared space. Importantly, we also have this link to the application guide. So after the technical report came out, there was an effort and a desire to have the report be described in maybe a more accessible way to a slightly different audience. So a group of practitioners, employees of NOAA and other federal agencies came together and did this really nice application guide that takes some of the key findings of the report, some of the key science items within the report, and tried to describe them in, let's say, a more accessible way. Within the technical report, our goal is really to deliver the updated science, the updated numbers, but this was an opportunity to help people understand exactly how to use that information and access it a little more easily. So you can get access to the report from this link, and as I noted, this is really the key background element. This is where we're pulling the data and the information from for the site, and that you'll see in the Sea Level Explorer. A couple other key things here. So we have a pretty rich section of FAQs. Some of these were written new as part of this effort. Others were pulled from various public resources that NOAA, NASA, and other agencies maintain. But really trying to explain some of these in more detail. You'll see in just a second that we leverage these FAQs throughout the site. So when we're talking about explanations of why sea level is changing, for instance, some of these FAQs are relevant and we can link to them. Same thing with these glossary descriptions. So we define an incredible number of words and terms here. And by doing this here, it allows us to have this integrated story across the whole site, where we're not just giving numbers and showing what's happening, but trying to explain why that's the case. So if we shift to the Sea Level 101, so again, this is one of 2 areas where I think most of the work went into at this early phase in terms of the content development. But we really wanted to step back and think about the message that we are trying to communicate about sea level, and really try to provide a clear description of how we understand the changes that are happening in the past, present, and the future. And we've broken it down into these few categories, and really they kind of build one after the other. So thinking in terms of this global sea level rise, what are the global drivers of sea level rise? What is how is global warming impacting sea level rise on a global scale? And thinking through exactly how that connects to the changes we're seeing on a global level. From there, we move to more local change. So how does that global process and those global drivers translate to a more local level? How do we measure those changes? So we talked about tide gauges, satellites, a whole host of different observations. We then connect that to future sea level. So how does all of that understanding we have about current sea level change, how does it impact our ability to say what's going to happen in the future? We talk a little bit about impacts, about the wide range of impacts that occur as a result of sea level or along the U.S. coastlines. And then finally end up with some statements on what can we do with this information and how can we address the challenges of sea level change. And just to walk through what one of these pages looks like, I'll do this for the global sea level rise, but we're really doing this in kind of a tiered approach, trying to hit a range of potential users, really coming up with just the basics. What are the key things you need to take away, and providing those descriptions as cleanly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And as you scroll down, we have new videos that we either have pulled from existing resources or have created new for this site, where you can really try to interact with this information in different ways. But then going through and seeing these descriptions and again, very accessible language. Our target language for this was about 6th to 8th grade level. So really trying to again address a very broad audience. You can see here one of these FAQs was pulled over. So when we're talking about global sea level rise and a topic like melting ice and how that impacts sea level, we can explain right here with one of these FAQs what's happening and the difference between sea ice and melting ice. And then as you scroll further down, there's some short facts that we pulled out just to kind of give an idea of the scope of the changes that we're seeing in these different elements. And then again, seeing some of these different explanations. From there, you can then go into a dive deeper page. So this gets a little more technical, but has a little bit extra detail on how changes are occurring. Again, pulling some of these animations that are shared across different agencies. And we have this for each of these pages. So if I go to the local sea level change, again, you can see the basics and dive deeper. But again, I don't want to, when I shift to the National Sea Level Explorer, which I think has a lot of the data and the messaging at a local level, I don't want to lose sight of the fact of the need across the federal agencies to really describe in very clear terms and in a consistent way. It doesn't make sense for NASA, NOAA, and USGS to all explain why sea level is changing with different terms and in different ways, right? We can do this in a shared space here, and hopefully it's something that can be leveraged for a lot of different uses. So a lot of work did go into this, which I think is a really key element as we move to the Data Explorer and think about some of the numbers that we're seeing. All right, so I'm going to shift to that National Sea Level Explorer. So when you click on this National Sea Level Explorer, we've broken down the information from the technical report in 3 different ways. So we've done it by region. So these were described within the report. So in terms of the regions, you can see the different levels here. There are 10 regions across the U.S. coastlines, including one for an additional one for the continental U.S. And you can click on these and kind of get a regional summary of that. The other level that you can see the information is at the state level. So if I select Alabama, for instance, I can go into a statewide average or a statewide summary of the information. And then the other thing I can do is select a tide gauge that might be present within that state. And different states have different number of tide gauges. So if I go to Virginia, for instance, you can see a few more tide gauges. I'm actually going to select Sewell's Point in just a second and go in and show some of the information that we provide there. One other thing to note here, so if you go into this map view, you can get a few different things here. So you can get this map underlying here is the sea level change that we get from satellite altimeters. If you click on a tide gauge, then you can see the sea level change that's occurred over the same time period from the tide gauge record. You can also shift into future projections as well. So kind of seeing this map view, or you can click on individual states. So it's another way to interact with information and then get into the more detailed pages if you choose to. So, all right, so going back here, I'm going to choose, so I used to live in Norfolk, Virginia. Now I'm in California, but Sewell's Point is near and dear to my heart. So I'll choose that one to kind of walk through. So similar to the approach that we had within the Sea Level 101, we have this tiered approach to the National Sea Level Explorer as well. So trying to come up with these key statements, right? So what are the basic things you need to know as a starting point? And one of those is that there's been a certain amount of sea level change in the past, and there's going to be a certain amount in the future. So this key statement here that you can see is over the past about 50 plus years, we've seen about 12 inches of sea level rise at Sewell's Point. In the next 30 years, we expect to see an additional 12 inches. So immediately you can see the statement that the rate of sea level rise is higher than it was in the past. We see the same amount over the next 30 years as we saw over the previous about 54 years. Providing a simple statement there. And then from there, you can start to drill down in a little more detail into these numbers. We have some new animations. So this is showing the seasonal cycle, the annual ups and downs over time, and how they shift from the 1970s all the way up to the present. One thing that we're doing is tracking present sea level. So that thick line there actually shows June of 2024. We'll update that about once a month, and it lags by a couple months to pull in the data. So that's why you're only seeing data for June, but we'll make the update shortly and have July and then August shortly thereafter. So you can see how the current year compares to what's in the past. But this is really just showing that sea level is rising over time, even though we still have these wiggles on top. So alongside each delivery of a figure or a number, we provide a number of different support features. So one key element here is that we have these key points. So if you look at this animation, what are you supposed to take away from it? So articulating very clearly what the key points associated with this animation are. You can actually listen to an explainer. So not simply describing what this figure shows, but what it means. What are you supposed to take away from it? So there's this audio explainer. You can also see the transcript of it as well right there. So again, different ways of looking at the information and really trying to make it more accessible, not just providing the animation, the graph, the number, but really explaining what does it mean, right? Not just what it is, but what does it mean? So now as you go down into additional detail, you can see different forms of the same data. So this is showing the tide gauge data, the altimetry data, and then the trajectory over time. Again, it's the exact same data as what's up here, just shown in a different form. And then tables showing the difference in the rates as you go forward into the future and the amount of sea level rise that we're seeing. There's also descriptions on how we measure. So again, this links back to the Sea Level 101. So pulling some of that work that was done on the Sea Level 101 pages back into the Explorer to help people understand exactly what they're seeing. And then if you want more understanding of what the data comes from, then you can get that explanation as well. All right, so from there, from that recent change to looking at the past, we can then move to the future, and using the sea level scenarios from the technical report, we can talk a little bit about the changes that we're expecting to see in the future. So again, that's top statement that I provided about the next 30 years. We're again providing that statement here. You can see easy animation or easy graphics for these scenarios. One thing that you can do up here also, so if I select the options, let's select this out to say 2100. I can choose a different scenario, convert to English and metric. So then it updates this statement. So you can see that under this intermediate scenario, we expect to see about 45 inches over the next 80 years. You can see this thing gets lengthened out to show that 2100. So you can look at different time periods and really explore the change that we expect to see, let's say over the next 30 years, over the next 100 years, and so on and so forth. And again, we have those explainers, those key points here as well. And then from there, again, you can get an idea of a little bit of additional detail as to what's behind those scenarios, knowing kind of what is contributing to those. So we know the different drivers, the processes, again, those are described elsewhere. So if I click here, you can see those explanations, which then take you back to the Sea Level 101 pages to really understand where these drivers come from. All right, so from there, with this is the kind of the statement of background sea level rise, that's that foundation of sea level. We then shift to what was the following section, the technical report, and start to think about the shift in the number of high tide flood days that we're going to see as we go out into the future. So it's a similar structure. We're providing a statement about what happened in the past, what's happening in the present, and what's going to happen in the future. And then some of the key numbers here showing the number of high tide flood days over time, how this has shifted. You can choose, again, different thresholds, different time periods. So you can look at a minor, moderate, major high tide flood day and exceedances of those thresholds through time. We have another animation here. This is the distribution of daily maximum sea level over the course of the year. So this is basically saying that your daily highest sea level is shifting forward into higher and higher sea levels. So this bold line is the most recent year, and you can see more and more of our days each year are pushing past this minor flood threshold. So trying to think about some new and innovative ways to show the data that I think a lot of people are very familiar with, but trying to show it in a way that is maybe more accessible and then really explain what we're looking at. And then from there, we're shifting to the future and thinking about how many days of flooding. I picked a very bad situation here where you can see that the numbers say that Sewell's Point will flood every day or not flood every day, but will exceed that minor high tide flood threshold every day by 2100 under the intermediate scenario. And then some of the numbers to support that. So this is what comes from the technical report and looking at the flood frequencies and the number of events that we expect to see in the future. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here in just a second, but this last tab here, we do get a request a lot for people want to know why is sea level changing locally where they are, what is causing it to change, and we actually have a very good understanding of that. So we're providing percentages of the breakdown both in the past and then the future regarding how much we expect sea level to change and what's driving that sea level change. So you can see that in Sewell's Point, vertical land motion, coastal subsidence is a big factor, along with, let's say, stereodynamics. So that's kind of the expansion of the ocean as it warms. If we shift to the future, you can see that starts to change a little bit. So the ice sheets in 2100 start to become more important, and you can see that breakdown. So this is, I think, an important indication that we understand the processes that are causing sea level to change. We model those, and then we can connect that to what we're seeing in the present. All right, and finally, the journey and this Sea Level Explorer ends up at these next steps. So this provides some additional resources. It links back to other parts of the website. It provides this basically, once you've gone through this information and these numbers, how do you make sense of it? What do we actually do with them? And what do they mean for us as we prepare for the future? So I think this is something that will continue to be built out, but for now we have some additional resources for people to go to. And then in terms of these last two tabs here, so they do two particular things. So the data, if you click on this button, it will provide a Excel spreadsheet of all the numbers I just showed you. So you can go and recreate any of these by clicking on that data in Excel and then working your magic and creating new graphs. We also have this short summary. It's a 4-page summary that gets auto-generated for each of these locations. So exact same numbers, slightly different forms of graphics, but showing the same thing, where you have a message about how sea level is changing in the past, present, and future, and then how that relates to impacts, and then talking a little bit about what we can do. So this is maybe a takeaway. So if you've gone through this journey and just want a resource to read through or to pull graphics from or anything like that, that's available as well here. And with that, I think I've covered pretty much everything on the site. I do want to note that I made the comment already that this is something we're going to continue to update as we go forward. So it won't become stale. The numbers that I showed you here, they do have an updated number. So they were last updated September 1st. I think we're going to start a cadence of updating these at the middle of each month. So another update will be triggered in about a week from now, and we'll update the information that's available. And we'll keep doing that. There may not be a dramatic shift in the content, like new content and features. That's something the task force will work through, but at the very least, we'll keep the data where appropriate up to date on this site. All right, I am going to stop sharing and then hand it to Britt, who I think is going to lead us the rest of the way here.
Thanks, Ben, for that great demonstration on how to explore the site and some of the features we have there. I think with that, we'll end the recording and switch over to our question and answer session. I will encourage all of you guys to put any questions that you may have for Mark or Ben in the chat. We're also joined by Gregory Husek, who is one of the other co-chairs of our technical body.